Development Committee, aka Advancement, who the principal folks are. So as I mentioned, being the council committee chair, each district has a chair as well. Delaware River is Jim Steinberg, Dutchess is Mark Shaffini, Heritage is Sherry Rocco, Rockland is Dave Ridge, and our staff advisor is Chris Hopkins. The other names on this slide are basically those involved with the Eagle processing, either scheduling or reviewing, sitting on the boards themselves, along with a lot of other folks. These names may change from time to time, but essentially on the Hudson Valley Scouting.org web page under Youth Development, you will be able to find the names of the current chairs and others associated with the Youth Development Committee.
Okay.
All right. So for this evening's presentation, we have two presenters. The first one will be Peter Dowley, who is the Dutchess District Eagle Advancement Chair. And he participates on the Council Advancement Committee. And Dave Ridge, who is the Rockland District Advancement Committee Chair. And between them, they will go through the material. And at the end, we will cover any general questions that come in. As questions may be submitted online, if I can answer them, I will certainly try to do that. It will appear that it's coming from Chris Hopkins, but I'm actually sitting in the organizer's chair this evening. And just by the way, this presentation deck is being recorded, and we will also have the deck up on the Council Advancement web pages in the next couple of days. So for those that would like to review the material at that time, you would be able to do that. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Peter Dowley.
Thank you, Don. Hello, everyone. As it says, it's a time of change. And we're working on a presumption that you folks are used to using or involved with using the 2012 printing. And you can identify what printing you're using by looking on that back page. And we're saying let your scout continue to use that 2012 version if he's been working in it, okay? I mean, we recognize that they don't just pick it up one night, bring it into the troop, get it approved, and then appear before the district. It doesn't happen that fast. And on the other hand, there is a new version out. The final plan and the fundraising application and the report sections of that may offer him some advantages because this is both a paper document, if you would, if you send it to your printer, but it's also an electronic document. There's programming in behind what you're looking at, and whether you can add things or delete things or expand boxes and other things like that are what that programming deals with. And so there can be advantages for having the scout move to the new stuff as he goes along. If he's using the 2012 printing, there is a separate document called Navigating the Eagle Scout Service Project, which is information for project beneficiaries, just as it says. It's two pages long, and it tells the beneficiary what scouting expects of the beneficiary and what the beneficiary should expect his scout to do. And so now we give you the link there to that document. In the 2014 printing, they've included that document. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so if he's just starting now, he really should be using the 2014 version. That's what's out there on National's website. And so if he is, as we say, just bounced an idea off you, let him get started with the new edition. I've looked through it. It has no real changes in its requirements, okay? It is not asking for a lot of new stuff or anything like that. This electronic workbook needs to be accessed via the link that you see there. It's possible to learn the direct workbook number and to attempt to get to it, but the first time you attempt to get to it, you need to have a little piece of software called Adobe Livecycle added onto your computer so that you can successfully work in the project workbook. And that's true for your scouts, okay? They need to follow the link that you see in front of you in order for things to work. And okay, so as we say, it now includes the navigating document. Next slide, please. The workbook has rules and forms. And I got to go back and point out that the workbook represents the implementation of a philosophy of the way a project should be approached. This workbook says the scout is supposed to present a proposal, an overview, an introduction, whatever you want to call it. It's not supposed to be fine-tuned details. That will come later. And so what the scout will find is that he's dealing with a proposal section of the workbook, although at the end of the proposal section, when he goes to sign that proposal as being his, he says that he has read the entire workbook. And that's useful because it's a time for him to raise questions with his leaders and with the district if the rest of the workbook has problems in his mind. Okay, so rules. Well, on the 2012 version, you can see there was an introduction, and there were cover pages, and there were parent info and excerpts from the Guide for Advancement included in the 2012 version, and they have moved that content around a bit. That's about really what they have done here in the 2014 version. You then have a contact information page. For those who are working in the 2012 version, you were asked to have your Scoutmaster and your committee chair prove that they were in scouting by providing their scouting ID number, and called the PID. And the 2014 one took that away. So if it looks like a Scoutmaster, I guess you're going to have to trust that it is. The project proposal is a form, and by each of the sections of the content of that form, there were explanations. And then it ended with a Scout certification and 4 proposal approvals. And those 4 proposal approvals are still the same, and the district's still comes last. And now the next section of the workbook is the final plan. That included a fundraising application in 2012 that has become a separate pair of pages in the 2014 version. And then you have a project report, and it still does require approvals by the benefiting organization and the Scoutmaster. Next slide, please. So as a leader, you want to make sure that your scout understands what he has gotten to work with. That he needs to understand the importance of this project in earning Eagle rank. As we said a couple of slides back, there are both rules and forms, and you need to go over that And as a matter of fact, it's not a question of, here, read it, fill it out, and then don't come back to me, go get approvals. No, read it, fill it out, come back to me, let's work on any questions that you have come up as you go along. When the scout is just starting, is an excellent time to put some realistic expectations in the average scout's thinking. All right? This is going to take time. I know that there are scouts out there who come along with, oh gosh, only months, sometimes it seems only weeks before they turn 18, and they are, they can be successful. But let's talk about Joe Average. He's going to need time, and he'll be much more comfortable and have a better learning experience in becoming an Eagle if he does spend time on his project. So review the form as it says, and go back over that form when he starts to work on a new section. It's just basic mentoring. Next slide, please. All right, so here we have the two different versions, page numberings, and as it says, the basic ideas are still true. Let's go on. Next slide. In 2011, National Scouting came out with a new document called the Guide to Advancement 2011. They revised it in 2013. It explains the full scope of these requirements. And Section 9 is the one that deals with Eagle Scout projects. And it is not that big. It is available online. It's, as I say, well written and easy to read. It's a good thing to take time as a leader to come to know. The workbook, again, has pages that give the rules that the scout should know and that you should know in advising him. And they're not just in the workbook, they've been brought over from the Guide to Advancement. Eagle projects, scouts will come along saying, everything is going to revolve around me. And the answer to that is, You are a scout in a troop. You have your responsibilities to the troop, and you'll need to fulfill them. And at the same time, you can't really come along and say, well, the troop can't do that because I'm doing my Eagle project. No, that's not the pecking order. The scout will need 2 deep adult leadership. One of those adults needs to have youth protection training credentials. There's much discussion in the workbook about the project as a fundraiser and about project fundraising. And as we note at the end there, it should not compete with other efforts of the unit or district or council. Next slide, please. But the idea of the project is that he will be demonstrating his leadership skills, and that this project's impact, the goodness that it does for the community, is going to be a key factor in that. And these proposals are not pass-fail, as it says, or in other words, one-step processes. He's going to start doing some planning, and he will have questions, or he will have knowledge gaps, and he needs to be able to come back to you and see it develop. You have to help him understand what he needs to do to really make this a full explanation of what his project is about. He's got the responsibility to help others understand what his project is about, but he has ideas in his mind, and he may not have put them down on paper. He has background knowledge in his mind, and he may not have put that down on paper. And if the document can't stand alone because it has those that background knowledge in it and so on, then people at the district level or the benefiting organization may not understand what he's talking about. So, and the other rest of that story, of course, is that this is all going to take time. Next slide, please. So here we are into the guts of the workbook. There was a page called the contact information page, which was part of the introduction. And in 2014, they have now moved that contact information page inside the proposal section. Other than that, not much change to it. Next slide, please. As it says, and in fact, the new contact information page points out the usefulness of this information. And you do want to get, you want to review it to make sure that it is current and correct. There is a problem in the 2014 version. It no longer calls for the council's email address to be put into that contact page, and that is the address that the Scout needs to use to get fundraising approval. We're going to have to address that and get the word out to all the leaders about it, but that's one of those situations that's just arisen. The Scout is asked to have a project coach. If you read the formal literature about a project coach, he's supposed to be a wise old man or a wise old woman. I hate to say anybody's an old woman, but at any rate, an older person who can advise the Scout in the handling of his project. It ought not to be somebody that the Scout is just going to regard as a buddy or as a formal signatory, okay? It's Dad. He's going to approve anything I want. It's my friend who's now 19 in the troop and now is a, quote, leader. No, the Scout deserves better than that. He deserves someone who can really be an influencer of what he does. Project description is supposed to be an overview, but it's not fact-free, all right? It's one thing to say that I'm going to build a shed, and it's another thing to say that it's a 16 by 40 shed that's 2 stories high. Okay, I didn't spend a lot of words, but you got very different images just then. And believe me, you need to get those kinds of words into the project description. This business about the project having a title, that was a nicety in the 2012 version. It is now right on the front cover of the 2014 version. Next slide, please. Briefly describe the project. It's a statement that is supposed to help people understand what he is about to say in the next sections of the project proposal. And so if all he has said is, I'm going to build a shed or a bridge or something, and suddenly you are now talking about bushes and plants and mulch, you know, you haven't conveyed the idea that you're going to do landscaping around this shed as well. The project description, they only really want you to put in, let's say, 50 to 75 words. But 5 to 10 words probably don't cut it. So you need to help the Scout understand the level of information that he's trying to convey. You need to ask him whether what he said there ties into the boxes that are going to come along asking him to put information in them later on. So the second, this project proposal is divided up into boxes for those of you who haven't looked at the form. I would hope you have one, but okay. So the next box then is something that asks for benefit. How will it help? And in this instance, we're saying try and look at what good it's going to do rather than getting all tied up in the severity of the problem that this benefiting organization has at this point. Next slide, please. Next, the scout is asked to say when he's going to begin work, and some will obviously say right after I get this proposal approved. But there are things that the scout is supposed to do before he rushes out to put a shovel in the ground. Okay, he's supposed to create a final plan. He's supposed to get fundraising approval and possibly to do the actual fundraising. And he's got to work up a schedule that will consider his troop activities and school events and family vacations and other things like that. So the scout who tosses off when are you going to begin with a right after approval is a scout who probably hasn't really thought that far ahead and ought to be questioned on it. Next slide, please. Here's the situation where, again, this is early for a project coach to be involved, but if the project coach is a technical advisor in terms of the type of work being done, this is where that adult experience can be useful. Or if the scoutmaster or some other leader, the committee chair, wants to sit down and say, well, wait a minute, you have various approvals and other things that you'll need to get before you can just jump in there and start working. You just have to challenge his thinking so that it becomes a realistic answer. Next slide. The scout will say to this question, how many people is what approximately is, pardon me. The scout is asked how many people are going to work on it. And he's going to stand there and say, I'm going to stand in front of my troop and get and make announcements, and we're going to have troop leaders and my friends and so on and so forth. That may not be a good answer. That may be far too many people. They may not have the right skills, and there's no sense in working on a project a bad experience for those other people. Again, where is the scout going to recruit people? Well, the workbook has some suggestions, but you need to temper that with the availability of actually getting people at the time that the workbook would seem to indicate and in the conditions that the workbook assumes are true. And scouts are asked what will be the leadership challenge. A lot of them would say maintaining control or making sure that people stay on track. Those are good answers, but they're incomplete in the sense that if you have work for people to do, then maintaining control over them is far easier. What the scout is telling you right there, though, is that he hasn't also looked at the final plan, because the final plan asks him to lay that out in great detail. And so, again, he was asked to read the whole workbook. So you're getting a peek into his mindset when you see his answer to that, what will be the leadership challenge question. Next slide, please. There are 3 boxes that ask for materials, supplies, and tools. And scouts are really asked to tell the types of, kinds of things that they will need, and some scouts have great difficulty in saying anything other than a really finite list of specific items. First of all, there's space for that list of specific items in the final plan. And secondly, it's useful to try and get the scout to realize he can categorize things into groups and still make sense. So we have some suggestions there, and undoubtedly you can come up with others, but next slide, please. The section on permits and permissions had notes in the 2012 version, and those notes were meaningful. They said that permits should be handled by the benefiting organization, and there's a reason for that. Those are legal agreements, okay? When you're dealing with schools, you want to make sure that that benefiting organization representative really has the authority to approve it. Schools and youth outdoor activities, all right? I'm going to deal with the soccer league, and the soccer league has permission to use a field which is owned by the town, which in turn is normally under the control of the town's outdoor activities chairperson or park person or whatever you would call them. And until you get to the town board or the town supervisor and feel you have a strong clearance, are you really good to go? You've gotten approval from the school superintendent, or pardon me, the principal, but does the superintendent of schools or even the Board of Education need to be involved in this? It's not like you need to obsess over this, but the question should be asked. Just because, and this is in here because we have seen situations where people thought they had the right approval, and all of a sudden they found out no, the people who thought they could say yes really didn't have the authority, and the Scouts project went right out the window. All right, there is a section for a preliminary cost estimate. And the idea was to put down all your costs, even if you expected things to be donated. You could define, there's nothing that says you can't include a separate piece of paper in this area if you want to, and say, here's what's being donated, and so here's my net costs that I would have to actually do some fundraising for, because the preliminary cost estimate asks, where are you going to get the money from? Which is a confusing question if most of the things are being donated. All right, but it's actually somewhat better laid out in the 2014 version. The next set of information the Scout is asked to provide is project phases. There are some guidelines there in the workbook, and it's a matter of getting the Scout to see how he's going to approach getting the work done. This will be refined in the final plan, but it's not just get approval, do the work, go home. There's more to it than that, and he needs to appreciate that. Next slide, please. They ask how are the materials and the people and so on going to get to the job site. There are situations where Scouts are talking about really stressing the carrying capacity of Dad's truck where scouts are possibly unrealistic. You know, Pop's going to take care of it or something is the attitude. They are responsible for this project. They should think their way through that. Safety issues. There are a whole lot of safety issues. There is a guide to safe scouting, which has a tool use set of information. You'll see reference to that later in this presentation. But it's not just all about tools. There are, as it says, dust and vapors and chemicals, and there's, particularly in this area, there's a real tick problem around here. And you need to make sure your scouts understand how to protect themselves against tick bites and how to have themselves inspected to make sure that they haven't, despite any protection measures they've taken, been bitten by a tick. Further planning. The last box to be filled in says, what are you going to have to do in order to go forward, if you would, okay? And some of that might very well mean, what does the scout have to learn in order to go on? And this is a place, again, where an experienced adult as a project coach is a really strong resource for your scout. Technically, if you read the Guide to Advancement, it really would say that the project coach's job starts with the final planning. But there are parts of the proposal where the project coach can be a help. And it would be, you'd be well advised to have your scout deal with the right project coach in doing his further planning. Next slide, please. Once the scout has developed his proposal, the unit needs to look at it and say, can we do this? It needs to look at these 5 tests that I reference, which asks whether this project will be able to meet the goals that scouting sets for an Eagle project. In other words, that it will give him ample opportunity for leadership. And is it feasible? The scout who comes to me in November and says, I have a landscaping project, is not presenting me with a feasible project. The home improvement centers and landscaping places have stopped selling the things he talks about planting in December a month or two before. And the ground will be frozen. And, you know, and he's turning 18 in the early spring. And yet this is what has finally come to the district. And you say to yourself, why? This isn't reasonable. It isn't feasible. Again, how does the scout address the safety issues that he might be faced with? And, okay, if I think what we said on the slide is you know, a good set of thoughts. The idea that the workbook will be a training tool for how he conducts himself in later life is a very true statement. Next slide, please. The project coach is identified by his unit leaders, although sometimes the scout wants to pick who the project coach is. But the unit leaders should be thinking about what project coach will be the best experience for this scout, as opposed to this is a buddy and, you know, he just will feel comfortable with him. No, that's not the coach's job necessarily. He's a teacher, he's a guide, he's a can be a technical advisor, and the idea is to get the scout ready to take on the leadership of this project and have confidence in himself. The coach is expected to make comments at the end of the final plan, and that should not be overlooked, because the board, his Eagle Board of Review, should be looking at those comments and seeing how the scout approached his project, how he got through it when they're reading the report, the project report that the scout will bring to his board of review. Next slide, please. I hate to put us in the position of saying we're here to help. That has a lot of negative implications at times. But we are. The council, your districts, have the people you saw identified up front, and who you should be meeting at roundtables and so on, to give you advice. And please don't hesitate to ask. That's really what we're here to help do. The Scout and the benefiting organization and the unit leadership all need to sign the proposal. And there are statements by their signatures, and those signatures indicate that they accept the responsibilities that those statements contain. A small change that shows up in the 2014 version is that not only do they sign, they have to print their names so you know who they are. But these approvals are not trivial. Okay, the Scout may think that he can get them done in a hurry. The Scout is going to come along and say, Mr. Jones, I need your signature. That's not really what's at stake here. That's not really what the process is right here. The person he's talking to should read what he has written and not necessarily tear it apart, but make sure that, but read it with a question in their own mind. Does this make sense to me? Does this look like the Scout can carry this out, can improve this in his final plan? Whatever question you want to put in your mind, okay? And once you're satisfied with it, then sign it. It shouldn't be a rubber stamp. Here in Hudson Valley Council, we want to have the project proposal get to the District Advancement Committee for its review. Because of geography and so on, things are handled different from district to district. But at any rate, your district people will be able to tell you what comes next, and so you'll get through the district approval process with their help. Next slide, please. Rather than having a group of people sit in a room and look at the proposal for the first time, these proposals are commonly reviewed in advance, and some queries or comments are sent to the Scout before he comes to the formal district level review. They'll call that a pre-review. It's not an endless series of round and round. No, it's a one-time thing. The proposal gets submitted for pre-review. The pre-review results go back to the Scout, and he then has an opportunity to make these changes before he comes to the district for a couple of Scouters to conduct that district-level review. There are council and district procedures for that. There's references to that at the end of the presentation. Again, we're looking not to have an amazing amount of detail in this. We're looking to see whether the people reading it get a reasonably warm feeling, if you would, that this scout is ready to go ahead, that he's ready to give this project the leadership that it takes. Leadership will require knowledge of what he's trying to do, and if it just seems like he's not really in control of his own project, then he's in trouble. And this is a time when the district and, for that matter, his unit leaders should be saying no if they feel they absolutely must. Quite frankly, the experience has been that most unit leaders do a good job, and so the district does not, in fact, find itself saying no the vast majority of the time. This is not a situation where you're faced with a super demanding district leadership. Don't let the scout get that notion in his head, but rather let the scout understand that his efforts are going to be appreciated, and he'll be encouraged. Okay. Next slide, please. There are times when the scout needs what's called a tour and activity plan. There are times when he may need a fundraising application. The district will give advice on that. There may be questions in troop leadership mind as to whether that is needed. There'll be information later in this presentation that deals with that. The project, as it says, can only go forward after the proposal has been approved by the district. In other words, the scout is not to start on the project. He's not to start on his fundraising. He's not to start to do anything except to get the district approval done before he goes ahead. You'll see that time and again in the literature. The 2014 workbook emphasizes that repeatedly. The scout, when he does get to the district for review, his proposal signature page will have the district signature added to it, and he keeps that. Becomes part of his completed workbook. If the scout needs to make changes afterward, usually because the beneficiary decides to change the scope of things, then that certainly needs to be discussed with unit leadership and may even require coming back for district review. Basically what we're saying here is the scout has engaged in pseudo contract with you and with the beneficiary, and you know, it's nice that the beneficiary saw that the scout really did a good job on the front lawn, and now they want it done on the back lawn too. But that's not what this project is about. The scout was supposed to do a certain amount of work, and so there can't be changes that significantly change the scope of what's going on without having the approving leadership at all levels possibly involved with it. There is as I say, scout process document. It's on our website, and there's the link to it. This will help walk the scout and you through him going through the whole Eagle Scout procedure. Next slide, please. Need for a tour and activity plan. The most obvious need is if the scout is going to do a project outside of Hudson Valley Council. A lot of times this comes along when the scout is on the borders of the council. A scout in northern Orange County might want to work in just across the line in southern Ulster County. There are school districts in northern Dutchess County that their reach extends into southern Columbia County because of the small population in that area. So the scout attends troop meetings where he goes to school, and he may even find that his parents shop and the family goes to church in Dutchess County. But he might in fact live a few miles outside of Dutchess County, and he might very well turn to the service organization, or a qualified benefiting organization that's over the line, and so his project is going to be in that kind of place, and he'll need a permit to have everybody go outside the the council boundaries to work there. The other time when we've seen it is if the mode of transportation might involve something more than private transportation. And the idea is that the tour and activity plan is a permission which says scouting understands that something is going on. It's better to have it than not have it. If you do require a plan, there's a paper form, and that is a good bit more flexible than the online form, just because the online form is oriented towards a group going to camp, or Cub Scout pack going to a museum, or other things like that. Okay, the paper form is better. And if it's needed, you send it into the council office, and when it is approved, you keep that approval and put it into your final report. Next slide, please. Okay, time for me to get off. Dave, this is what it looks like in the differences between the two 2012 and 2014 versions, but okay, it's time to turn it over to Dave Ridge.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Can we go to the next slide, Don? So we're going to run through the remaining sections of the workbook, the next one being the final plan. And as it says here, the plan is actually a tool. You could argue that it's actually not required that they complete this particular plan as the tool that they might use, but the requirement of the ECO project is that they show a sufficient amount of planning and organization, and BSA feels that this format is an appropriate tool for the scout to use to guide him through that planning process. It elaborates on the details that were referenced in the proposal. Young people are pretty good at kind of looking at point A and point B and trying to find a straight line between those 2 points without thinking about all the details and all the pitfalls in between. And this plan is where they can avoid some of those pitfalls. Certainly working with coach can put a plan on paper that will increase the likelihood of the project being successful. It does not get approved, it doesn't get signed, but we will talk about how it should come back into the final workbook at the time of the board of review. It certainly should be shared with the project coach. The coach should be integral in working through the details of the plan with the scout, and certainly it should be shared with the beneficiary so that it's clear to the beneficiary that they're getting what they expect out of the project. Okay, next slide. Okay, so again, impress upon the scout that time spent up front working out a good plan will reward him in the end. So the more detail he can work through in the plan, the more of those pitfalls he can identify and circumvent, the more smoothly it will go. And as Peter mentioned earlier, this EAGLE project and the process for going through with the proposal, the plan, and even the report is a great training ground for Scouts to learn how to develop proposals and reports. Certainly, almost all of them in their adult lives will have to write a proposal of some sort to a customer. They'll have to sell an idea to a customer, and then ultimately have to report back. And the EAGLE process is an excellent training tool for doing that. Again, it's not a one-shot deal. It's going to be an evolutionary process. It'll be back and forth with the unit leadership, with the beneficiary, with the coach, until everybody's satisfied that the details that are in that plan meet everybody's expectations. And certainly the adults in the troop have more experience doing this kind of thing, especially those who may be contractors and do this on a daily basis, can offer a tremendous amount of advice to the Scout. Next slide.
I think we skipped one. There we go.
No, that's the right one now. Okay. So again, as I mentioned, reinforce to the Scout that while they don't have to use this particular plan, I think it's a good plan. It's one that BSA recommends, and I don't see any downside to using it at all. So think through all of the steps. Material costs in particular, and Peter has talked about a lot of this. This is where now you're putting some details to the cost estimate. In the proposal, you may be in the $1,000 to $2,000 range. Now we'd like to know in a little more detail how much is this project likely to cost, taking into account any donations you might be getting, so that as you formalize your fundraising efforts, you're not overshooting or undershooting. Try to have the Scout be clear about expenses that he's going to have to pay for and materials or supplies that may be donated. It's not clear in the workbook how you designate donated materials versus purchased materials, but try to set up a system with the Scouts so that they keep that kind of bookkeeping straight, so that in the end, if you had a $10,000 project, $5,000 worth of it is from donated services, it would be nice to be clear about that point. A lot of Scouts sweat over trying to put a value around borrowed tools. Not required. That's just needless effort. If tools are borrowed, they're borrowed, and that's the end of that. Okay, next slide. So as I mentioned, the submission of the plan should be submitted. I think most districts will expect that the plan will be submitted with the final report, because the expectation of the project overall is to have an impact on the community and to show that the Scout has demonstrated and developed appropriate levels of leadership. So the work that's put into the plan, the amount of detail, the amount of thought process that went into the plan is a critical step in, first of all, the unit leadership and then the district leadership assessing whether those two criteria have really been met. So encourage them to use the plan and put it into the final workbook when they submit it for their district board of review. Next slide. Okay, if there are cases where a project may be funded by certain sources and that does not require a fundraising application, namely, and this is all in the workbook, if it comes from the candidate, the EAGLE candidate, his parents, relatives, the unit, the chartered organization, or the parents or the members of the unit or the beneficiary, you do not need a fundraising application. Some of your funds may come from those sources, other funds may not. You still would need a fundraising application for the sources that are not included in that list of exemptions. On a personal note, and then I think each unit should probably grapple with their philosophy on sources of fundraising. Personally, I think that because the Eagle Project has a significant leadership component, that asking mom or dad to write a check for the project probably is not the best way of showing good leadership. Similarly, going back to the unit and asking for money when you're asking the unit for volunteer labor will probably wear pretty thin pretty quickly, especially if you may have 2 or 3 or 4 Eagles a year coming through that unit. So each unit leadership should decide how they want to handle that. On a district level, we cannot forbid it, but again, we will leave it to the unit to try to manage that as they see fit. Funds should only be raised to complete the project based on the estimate in the plan. You want to try to come as close as you can to that estimate so they don't have a lot of extra or certainly not have a shortfall. You should not be raising a lot of extra money as a donation to the beneficiary. That's not appropriate. Each council can decide how they want to handle fundraising approval. In the Hudson Valley Council, projects of a value greater than or equal to $500 goes to the council for approval, and Peter has mentioned that. Our council has decided that projects of a value under $500 can actually be approved at the district level, and at the district review, the process for doing that will be described and provided to them. In the application, either way, there should be inclusion of the project proposal, so it's clear what the project is all about, and a list of the prospective donors that you want to go after. It doesn't have to be absolutely accurate or complete, but you should have a list of potential donors. If it's a number of businesses, are you going to approach 5 businesses or 50 businesses? That approval process will take some time, so you need to make sure the scout understands that that has to be built into the process. And again, the approval with fundraising application in whatever form that might take, sometimes it takes the form of just an email back and forth between the scout and the approver, should be included in the report. Just on a side note too, while 2 scouts cannot share an Eagle service project, they can in fact share a Eagle fundraising activity. So if it's a car wash, for example, 2 Eagle candidates can get together for that kind of a fundraising. Next slide. And in that fundraising application, there are 3 beneficiaries, 3 signatures that are required. The beneficiary needs to sign it, the unit leadership, and the council. Again, read and get comfortable with that navigation slide that Peter mentioned that's now part of the current workbook. And make sure everybody understands that fundraising is done not on the behalf of the Boy Scouts, but on behalf of the sponsor that you're doing the project for. So units may handle the money in different ways, but if anybody wants a receipt for the funds that they've donated, that receipt needs to come from the beneficiary of the project, not from the Boy Scouts of America. There's a number of ways of handling that. You can have a ready-made fill-in-the-blanks kind of a receipt, or there may be some other ways that your troop chooses to handle that. Okay, next slide. So the last section is the project report. We can go on to the next slide. This is actually the final report that talks about how the project went. In the new version, which came out 2 days ago, they've added a couple of new sections in the beginning that asks the scout actually to repeat a description of the project, which really is somewhat redundant, I guess, if you include the project proposal that was originally approved in the workbook. But nonetheless, there's a field for adding a brief project description, and then a field that asks for what you did after approval of the project to complete the plan. So it's trying to get some insight into how the Scout approached the planning process. There should be a summary of the time that was involved, not in unnecessary detail, but it gives the Board of Review a look at how many Scouts friends, how many adults were involved in the process, and it helps to kind of shape a view of how the Scout approached getting his resources to complete the project. Again, a funding summary should be provided, shows the extent of the donors that were solicited. And then there's space for a few key photos. There's not an unlimited amount of space there, and often if there's a half a dozen photos, a few before, a few after photos, that's all that's required. If the Scout wants to bring in a kind of an appendix of photos showing Scouts at work, Scouts in action, that's fine, but they don't need to be included in the report. And then the signatures at the end of the report indicates that the sponsor is satisfied that the project was completed to their specifications as provided in the proposal and in the plan, that it was done to the satisfaction of the unit leadership, and the Scout signifies that they completed the plan in accord with the proposal as well. Okay, I think we can go on to the next slide. Again, the key thing about the project is that the Scout shows an appropriate level of leadership in conducting the projects. It's not just getting a service completed to the community, but that the Scout showed leadership. So if unit leaders participate in the project, they can see how that leadership process is going. You may want to take note of, did a parent step in and take control? Did the coach take control? Or some other unit leader take control? And if you see that happening, you want to make sure that you encourage the Scout and you guide the Scout to understand that the project is theirs to lead and not someone else's. Certainly resources can be helpful, but they can't defer that leadership activity to someone else. Again, read Guide to Advancement about the impact to the community, and you know, in addition to just the leadership, did the Scouts show appropriate planning and organization and development of the project? And here is where the inclusion of the final plan in the final workbook is helpful in making that assessment. And always during the course of the project, some changes are made if they're considered to be fairly trivial. That can be discussed with the unit leadership or with coach. Make sure that any changes are approved by the beneficiary, but if it's a substantial change from what was approved by the district, certainly consider circling back one way or the other with the district review committee to make them aware of changes of that sort. Okay, next slide. Okay. Again, in line with this comment that was made about this being an excellent training opportunity for Scouts as they move into adulthood, make sure that they do focus on quality. We see quite a difference of quality documents that come in the final workbook form. Some are fairly sloppy, not carefully reviewed. It's doubtful that some of them were reviewed very carefully by adult leadership. So work with the Scout and make sure that it's making the workbook makes a proper presentation and makes a quality presentation, an impressive presentation. This will serve them well in their adult life, whether it's spelling, use of good grammar, or just other quality factors. Make sure they pay some attention to that. If for any reason the beneficiary or the unit leadership decides that they don't want to sign off on the project, there are procedures in the Guide to Advancement that address those scenarios. So again, make sure you've all got that Guide to Advancement available. Read the section as appropriate on Eagle projects, and if that particular kind of a situation comes up, you need to be clear on what the processes are and how to advise the scout moving forward. Okay, next slide. So in wrap up, I don't want to preach to the choir here. I think probably everybody on this call understands their role as a unit leader. It is an awesome responsibility, but make sure that you're, especially if you've gotten the scout to this point in the program, that you're giving them the appropriate levels of encouragement and reinforcement and guidance on their path to Eagle. We find that most of the scouts who are encountering problems with their Eagle projects aren't getting appropriate levels of leadership, either because the unit leadership is not involved, or in some cases they just don't understand the process. They're not coming to roundtables. They're not reading the references that that are being given to you here tonight. They're not reading information that's up on the websites. So get familiar with all of that material so you can provide that proper level of support to the scout, and make sure that, you know, as they go through this process, that they're getting good guidance, because they're always going to remember their unit leadership, and you want to make sure that that memory that they have is a positive one throughout their lives. Next slide, please. So again, if any of you have any questions on the Trail to Eagle process, Peter and I are available at these email addresses. Also, probably, I believe each district has annual Trail to Eagle roundtable presentations. Make sure you take advantage of those. And there's a lot of material on either the council or your district websites. Make sure you know where to find that as well. And then I think the last couple of pages are just reference materials. If we can switch to those. Yeah, I believe all these are current now. There may be a few bullets here. The third and the fifth bullets don't have links, but actually those are references on the Hudson Valley Council website. If you look on the Youth Development tab, you will find those particular process descriptions there. Very helpful as they're updated, or as they're refined, they'll be updated on those websites. Next page. I think this is just another listing of additional resource materials that you should all keep at your fingertips and use them to help the scout as they move through the process. So that's the end of my part of the presentation. I think we've now covered all parts of the workbook, and I'll turn it back to Don in case he has any questions that need to be addressed.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So I've been answering questions as they've been posted. Just let me, mention one of the questions was about downloading the workbook. Right. One of the things that they've done recently is they put up a page, and we'll make that link available. And that page is on the national website, and it provides sort of a couple of bullets on the proper way of downloading the workbook, and gives you a choice of using an Apple Mac version or a Windows PC version of the workbook. So the boys need to make sure that they are going to get the correct one, and the proper instructions are to download the document to your computer, save it, and then start working on it. So those are important instructions. So we'll be working on that.
John,
yeah.
If I might, the link up front is to this access that you're talking about.
Okay.
It's not directly to the workbook. if you're still looking at slide 40, you notice it says do not access directly.
Right, right.
Okay.
Right. So the link that I have on our website, on the advancement website that says Eagle Project Workbook, I am going to change that. Today, that will allow you to grab the Windows version of the PDF, but I will be changing that so that they get the proper screen. All right, let me just go through real quickly some of the questions that have come in. If they're germane to the group, I will read them and provide the answer. For the most part, I think most of these have been answered already. So will the presentation be available? The answer is yes. We will be posting the slide deck, and we will also be trying to provide a link that will be giving you a YouTube version of this, so that will include the audio as well as the visuals, but the deck will be out there as well if someone would like to share that. Certainly the focus of this was for troop leadership, advancement chairs, coaches. However, there's certainly nothing wrong in sharing this material with a scout if that was something that you wanted to do. I know in some cases, as Dave was saying, we have presentations at roundtables, and in fact some districts also provide two different presentations, one to troop leadership and one to scouts.
Yep, Dutchess has that.
Right. All right, let's see what else we have here. Okay, will a troop be able to deny a scout from starting a project when he only has a couple of days / couple of weeks before his 18th birthday? This topic actually was one that we as a council have addressed, and these are difficult situations as National calls them. And typically when we come up with this, if we want to do a head check with council, from council to National, we have some of our contacts. So to answer the question is that their approach is we do not deny the scout to start a project even though he may only have a couple of weeks before his 18th birthday. The key here is that the project must be completed in its entirety by the time the scout is 18. So they cannot have any work progressing further than their 18th birthday. So and of course that goes along with the leadership in the troop, the participation in the troop, merit badges, and any other requirements for the rank of Eagle. Okay, but we should not be denying them to start because if they want to work 20 hours a day and get people to help them, then that's their way of getting the project done. But as Dave mentioned earlier, one of the things that you need to be careful of is that this does not turn into a scout and his parents doing all the work for the project, because then the leadership component is not being exhibited the way it's expected. Let's see.
Not only the shovels in the ground kind of activity needs to be finished, the paperwork needs to be done as well. I mean, that final report needs to be prepared and signed off. I mean, to have successfully completed requirement 5 of Eagle Scout requirements, the project needs to be done. And as that old saying puts it, it ain't over until the paperwork's been handled.
Yep. All right. Another question was, can a scout pay for the entire project? I mean, that was addressed during the webinar. So by national standards, they can, but that's really not what we're looking for. Again, as a component, they learn from doing fundraising, but again, that's just something that we look for, but we cannot demand that doesn't take place.
Don,
Final
if I might,
approvals. Did someone have a comment?
Yeah, Don, if I might, the National, quite frankly, is trying to encourage boys to earn Eagle Scout rank without being involved in mega cost projects. They are quite, looking at the Guide to Advancement, they are quite happy with simpler projects. They are quite happy with projects that are funded by the beneficiary. What they want to see is that the Scout exerted the right amount of leadership. There's an eternal debate about whether, if you don't need to raise money for it, have you shown leadership? And I'll say that to a great extent, I think National's answer is yes. We're used to seeing fundraising done, but on the other hand, there are Scouts who are approached by organizations that say, we want you to do this for us, and we have the money for it. Scout doesn't even have an opportunity to say, no, I'm going to go raise the money for it. It's just that way. So you got to play the game the way the ball lands. It's just that way.
Yep. I mean, personally, working with Scouts in my own unit down here in Rockland, if my philosophy is, yes, the beneficiary may offer to pick up the tab for it, but to show goodwill and leadership capabilities, any fundraising that could be done to reduce their cost would certainly be beneficial to them. So, and I'd leave it at that. Okay, another question was, does there need to be a final approval before they can start the project? And again, I think that was mentioned during tonight's presentation that once the district approves the project proposal, that is really the last signature that's necessary. The final plan portion of the document is recommended and is sort of what I'll call an internal document, right, used by the Scout and the project coach to move the plan forward and make sure they have all their ducks in a row, but there is no other signature required from the district or the council on that portion of the packet.
John, let me add a thought there. The basic requirement for number 5 to do a project says plan, develop, and give leadership to others. And then they have a bunch of other words. The plan part of it, National says, is being taken care of by the proposal idea, the developing of it, turning it into something that can walk and talk and, look successful. That's what gets handled up front in the final plan. But that's National's way of saying, do this kind of stuff, and then you'll be able to show your border review that you actually did develop this proposal into something that can stand on its own 2 feet. Well, what if the Scout doesn't want to use Boy Scouting's final plan? Okay, he doesn't have to, but he still has the burden of proof. So that's where the board of review in this system that has been in place, so to speak, since the 2011 workbook first came out, is saying, hey, the Eagle boards need to be hard-nosed about approving someone for Eagle if they don't have proof that they actually did develop this idea into something that could be accomplished. It wasn't just, okay, we got approval, let's go buy the stuff and get down to the site and make it all happen. And that, I'm sorry, that's Dad on Saturday afternoon trying to make Mom happy with replacing the rotting back porch or something, okay? That's not necessarily what scouting is talking to, or that is not what scouting is talking to Eagle candidates about doing. And so there's a difference. Do many Eagle boards say no? I would think not. But then again, we're asking the scout to show proof. And that's really the whole arena that we're in. Thank you, Don.
Sure. Another question was, is there a timeline in the proposal section? Right. I think the purpose of the section called project phases, again, is to get the scout to logically think out the different pieces of it. The final plan also has a list of project phases in here. There is not, to my knowledge, a specific section called timeline, although certainly something like that should be developed, sitting along with the beneficiary and the coach, because a project that you might want to work on once a week or every day, right? How long is it really going to take to complete it? Will all depend upon your ability to get resources and the ability of the beneficiary to allow work to commence on the days that the boys want to work on. So,
Don, if I could just add a comment on the project phase topic, which is both in the proposal and in the plan. Many of the scouts we see think too specifically in that regard about project activities and not project phases. And they talk about, they list things like, we're going to dig the holes, we're going to put sonic tubes in, then we're going to fill them with cement, and then we're going to put the benches in place. Those aren't project phases, those are project activities. So, it's not the kiss of death on a proposal, but we're trying to get them to think in terms of phases. Phases are things like the planning phase, scheduling phase, a site preparation, construction phase, a site cleanup phase, a fundraising phase, things like that, more general terms. And I think this is part of the training process that we should help the boys go through, is get them away from thinking always in specifics and think a little bit more in compartments.
Yep, definitely. All right, there was a question on what is the order of approvals. So essentially the signature pages for the proposal show basically four boxes, right? So you have your beneficiary, your unit leader, unit committee, and then the council or district approval. In the Hudson Valley Council, we don't do council approvals, we do district approvals. So typically, the scout is going to work with his project coach to develop and get to the point where the proposal is in reasonably good shape, and then typically the beneficiary and the unit leader will sign these documents, and then the scout goes forward and makes an appointment with the unit committee to make a presentation and obtain the unit committee approval. Following that, then we have a document as referenced in tonight's webinar that talks about how does the scout get on to the district presentation for getting his project reviewed and approved at the district level. So that's typically the order in which these things get approved, and again, that's for the proposal, right? The other signature page is at the end in the final project report, and again, there is the scout is signing it that he has done his piece, the beneficiary is signing it, and the unit leader is signing it. So I don't think there's a criticality to which one comes first. because both signatures are going to be required for the final board review to be scheduled. Any other comments from?
I think from a unit perspective, I would want to see that the beneficiary is satisfied with the project, whether it's the proposal or the final, before I would sign off on it as a unit leader. So, you know, it needs to meet your customers' expectations before you can really give it your blessing.
There's nothing wrong, so to speak, with saying, hey, let's have a meeting. Okay? I mean, this could all be done at one signing session where you have the unit leader and the unit committee leader and the beneficiary sitting there saying, yes, we're all happy, and putting signatures on paper.
Yeah, even better. Right.
Okay. It's funny. You look in the new workbook, it says unit leader approval on the left-hand side, unit committee approval on the right-hand side. They're side by side with one another. And then underneath that, it says beneficiary. And then finally over on the lower right, it says council or district. And there's an asterisk, and it says, while it makes sense to obtain approvals in the order they appear, well, the order they appear in is kind of vague. and so, yeah, follow some logic here. And again, the scout shouldn't be running up to somebody just saying, I need your signature. No, he needs to have them turn on brain, review material, agree with it, think that it's in his own best interest, the troop's best interest, and the scout's best interest, and then sign his name or her name. It shouldn't, you know, scouts are in a hurry. I mean, they've been in a hurry for a long time. But, okay.
Yeah, just one other thought comes to mind. Talking about leadership, in the books prompt the scout to talk about leadership, really almost in a way of how do they show leadership to actually execute the project. And I try to impress upon scouts that there's a lot of leadership that they need to show, and I'm sure they have shown, apart from digging the holes and pouring the concrete. There's leadership in terms of conceptualizing the project and maybe selling it to the beneficiary, and then developing fundraising plans and going out and doing the fundraising. And then there's the execution of the project, but then there's project approvals, and there's report writing, and there's leadership aspects throughout the whole thing from day one until the very last day. And I like to get scouts thinking in those terms rather than just talking about how they organized their volunteers to dig holes and pour concrete.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Let's see what else we have here. Are there rules around getting donated materials? So if for those that need to obtain donations, I mean, typically if you read the project fundraising application, you'll see that basically it talks about what your limitations are as far as doing Eagle Scout project fundraising. It's not the same as a unit doing a fundraiser, right? So be sure to read the back page of that form. But typically, the scouts will write a letter explaining in a paragraph or two what their project is and what materials that they're looking to have donated and going to a place of business. If they are going to do that, even if the materials are donated, the cost of such still gets included in the total cost of the project. And when they submit their fundraising application, one of the things that I'm constantly going back at the boys is, you're telling me you're writing a letter and going to ask for donations, but you're not explaining to me who you're going to ask. And that is a requirement of the fundraising application. So sometimes they, I guess they don't read the small print. But basically, you know, any organization can be asked for donations, and if they donate, obviously, you know, that needs to be kept as part of their final report as well. Any other comments from you guys?
Oh, that's fine.
Okay. All right.
I mean, seeing the donations targeted to appropriate sources is good. I had a scout come along saying, well, I have access to the mailing list of the Rotary Club. Oh, so you're going to go to the mechanics and the hairdressers and the printing service in town and ask for money for, you know, as opposed to going to the building supply places and the plumbing supply places for your kind of project. The problem with that is that Scouting tries to raise money from the general community in the Community Friends of Scouting campaigns. And so you don't want to find the Scout has poisoned that well, if you would, so that when someone representing the Friends of Scouting campaign shows up and says, would you please donate, they say, oh, I gave to the Eagle Scout project a few weeks ago. Okay. Where they go for their money should have some relationship to what they're doing. Is a good rule of thumb.
All right, let me see. Some people have started to drop off here. See what else there might be here. All right, a question about the project proposal was just approved. Should they go back and use the current workbook? So, you know, I think our suggestion early on in the webinar was to basically, when you fill out the final plan and then go forward with the final report, to switch over, you know, if possible, to the new workbook. Use the new capabilities. That they have tweaked it a bit and made it a little bit better than the old version. So, if possible, that would be the best approach. Let's see here. Somebody asked if we could go back one page to the links, so I've just bounced up a page. But again, you know, this presentation will be posted. So people will be able to download a PDF version of this and be able to print it if they wanted to, or reference these links without a problem. Okay, let's see. Could a fundraiser be a concert to benefit the project? I mean, I've seen spaghetti dinners, pancake breakfasts, and you know, those types of things. So I don't see any reason why that couldn't be, you know, done. Obviously, assuming that people that are buying tickets to it are very clear that, you know, this is where the money is going, right? To the beneficiary for the purpose of Project XYZ. Right? There should be no issues with that.
And we had a proposal recently, Don, of a scout who wanted to do a concert as a fundraising for a charitable gift. Obviously, that is not appropriate. The concert to raise money to conduct another kind of a project is fine, but not to donate it to a charity.
Yep.
Yep. Plain in the rules up front.
Exactly. Exactly.
On the other hand, a concert's a lot more novel than a car wash. Hey.
That's right.
I mean, if you got the talent, you use it. Hey.
Sure.
Let's see. Could a project coach be your parent? I mean, certainly there's no rules that say that that's not permitted. although typically, what we try to teach the boys is to, learn and grow in their ability to work with other adults. And typically, project coaches are, as again stated earlier tonight, typically someone that is knowledgeable about the Eagle process, and if the particular project requires a carpenter or mechanical drawings or something along those lines, where there's someone in the troop or even a friend of the scouts or the scouts family that has that level of expertise, and he or she would be willing to work as a project coach, that would be great. But there is no requirement that says that that a parent could not be or cannot be the project coach.
Tom, I believe it also says that the coach must be a registered scouter. Now, that doesn't exclude parents, but if the parent is not a registered scouter, that in itself might exclude them.
No, Dave, I don't think you have to be a registered scouter, but
I thought I read that recently, but I'm not 100% sure.
In the merit badge program, we've been encouraging this scout who's coming in on his 21 merit badges probably to go outside of the locals, to go out there and talk to other people. It's one of those purposes of the merit badge program. And it's the same sort of thing here with the project coach. You need somebody that can tell you no. You need somebody that's going to give you an independent opinion. Dad has to think about, what's going to happen tomorrow if I tell him no tonight? So
I found the clarification on this.
Okay.
Okay. On page 6 of the new workbook, talks is a couple of paragraphs about the project coaches, and it says it's up to the council to determine who may serve as a coach and how they may be assigned or otherwise provided. I mean, that's something that we as a council, do not provide coaches as we do merit badge counselors. But it does say coaches must be registered with the BSA in any position and be current in youth protection training, may come from the unit district or council level. So Dave was actually correct on that one.
Great.
I guess we have not really published any guidelines specifically about this. So I guess the point here is that we should probably do that and make sure that everyone understands about that. So that's a good question that came up from the person that submitted it, and we will work on clarifying that in our documentation. I think we're at the end of the questions at this point. So on behalf of the council, again, for those that are still on the phone, there's close to 30 folks. Thanks for hanging the extra, 35, 40 minutes. Hopefully it was beneficial. If anyone would like to send any feedback, positive or negative, we're always looking for feedback. Certainly you can send an email to advancement@HudsonValleyScouting.org. That will, come to me, and then I can, get it to Dave or Peter. We tend to tweak these presentations from time to time and use them several times over the year. So if anyone has any suggestions or comments, we certainly would welcome that. And again, thanks to Peter and Dave. I know Chris Hopkins is out there somewhere. Thanks everybody for assisting, and we will be announcing another one of these later on. But again, any questions or comments, feel free to send by email. Thanks very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Don.
Bye.
Bye.